This appears to be a very obtuse and understated, it is understated, but it's not that complicated. And in seeing it for a second time this afternoon, I realized one reason why it sustains our interest is not because we want to find out who done it. Yes, that's true. We want to get to the bottom of things. But I noticed very cleverly, and this is not a new technique, but the filmmaker, there's this running motif of Kafuku listening to the tape in the car. That's his habit, how he learns the show. And it's related to a lot of things. But if you notice, every time we cut to him listening to a tape or the driver listening to a tape, it's actually responding to something that happened in the scene before. About betrayal, about death, about loneliness, about who are other people, how do we know them? It's fascinating. And I didn't sense it the first time. I figured, well, they're related in some way, but I didn't get the connections between the tape intercuts with the scenes. And they're major scenes when he's talking to the tape recorder. So that's a reason for the continuity we experienced throughout the film, throughout 3 hours. That said, I'll help you out. The red car, everybody recognize the Saab 800, which was even given a credit at the back end? It's a red car. Do we see any other red cars in the movie? And this is a minor detail. I'm chasing a metaphor here. There aren't, but it stands out, right? And at one point he says to her, there's no electronics on this. It's an old car and I take care of it. So he's a purist, right? That's what the car tells us about him. It's a flashy red car. You know, if he were 20 years old, it would be a red convertible, reliving the youth he never had. But he's old-fashioned that way. Just like as a theater director, he's a slave to the text, right? And there's lots of parallels between the Torah study and the U.S. Constitution. Any piece of literature that is held up as part of the canon of civilization is open to this kind of, well, do we take it literally or do we interpret it for our own time? Now, I want to start out with something about Chekhov. And we had a discussion at the South Bay group. Somebody mentioned Randy's screening group. This is the South Bay Film Society. It's in their 7th year or so. Randy Burler runs this. He has excellent taste, probably better than mine. And he'll have maybe 500 people in 3 screening rooms at an AMC in Torrance. It's a long drive from LA. I know I used to do it for 2 hours at 5 o'clock, but it's worth it because it's a very responsive audience. And so that's the South Bay Film Society. But talking about the red car, it's a metaphor for the play. You notice the shots in between the hotel and the theater and Tokyo and Narita Airport and Hiroshima and back. There's long transition shots of the car. Why is the car such a character? It dawned on me that the car is a symbol of the play that's transporting the players, the passengers, to different awarenesses of their situation and the situation of other people. A lot of important conversations happen in the car. So as we think back about it, it's like the car is this womb that he feels comfortable in, insulating himself from the world, yet allowing him to go more deeper into his reality, which is insular in itself, but it's not solipsistic. He shares it with her, and we'll come to the driver later. But I wanted to point that out, that that's the most symbolic. Everything else, or most everything else, is pretty overt. It's not a difficult film to understand. But before we dive in, I want to ask people, did anybody look up what Uncle Vanya is about, or did anybody know what Uncle Vanya is about? Marina. Okay, there we go. Our literature professor gets to tell us about Uncle Vanya and the importance of Chekhov in the international theater scene, because this is universal, right?
So Chekhov, I have earphones. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we hear you well.
Or should I take them off?
No, we hear you well.
Okay. Right. So Chekhov, his importance is in the world literature and in the theater. It's determined by his attention to detail. Chekhov required of his prose and of his dialogue in the theater that every word meant something, and not the surface, but had a deeper meaning. The main character in this movie says that this text transforms you. You need to go deep into the text. It transforms you. But that's not just his opinion. That's what Chekhov does. And his plays that were written in the 19th century, his short stories, they continue to be relevant today, and they continue to dominate theaters all over the world. I saw Uncle Vanya in the Geffen Theater. I saw a spin-off in Music Center. There are different versions of Uncle Vanya. There is a book where the author gave the character the name Ivan only to be able to call him Uncle Vanya. And Chekhov is important for any intellectual nowadays and in 2 centuries before us. But what is Uncle Vanya about? It's about a family, an entangled family, where some people live in the country, and they try to maintain the household and provide income for a professor who lives in the city and doesn't earn much. But when the professor retires and comes back to the country, there is unhappiness all over. And he has a young and beautiful wife who enchants everybody around, both the household people and nearby dwellers. And the purpose of their discussions is the reason for living. Why do we live? What is our goal in life? What do we merit up to? And it's eternal. It's for everyone to think about. And that's what the theater director and a brilliant actor wants his students to explore.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's a little bit more of the plot, but it doesn't matter. That was a great summary. I want to add that when we had a discussion at the South Bay Film Society of this film, someone asked me, what's a Russian director, a Japanese man directing a Russian play? The cultures are so different. And I think you put your finger on it, Marina. It's universal. He has so reduced humanity to an essence in his writing that every word counts, and it affects people profoundly, just as it did the director in the film. And that's why he's still performed to this day, like Fiddler on the Roof, which is still being performed somewhere in the world every day of the year, so many years later. It speaks to people. Another anecdote is, because I know this because there's a documentary on the why Fiddler is so universal. They went to Japan to interview people who saw the Japanese performance in Japanese. And a Japanese woman said, "I'm surprised this is so popular. It's so Japanese." And this is Fiddler on the Roof. Right. So it's like drama, theater, cinema has a way of getting under everybody's skin, in a way that says we're all reachable through these arts. There are other arts as well, but it's a particular feature of drama where there's so many characters we can see ourselves in. And that's what makes this film, the play within the film, so relevant, in that everything about the play is talking about Kafuku's situation. So let's go back and start to look at it. You know, the titles occur 42 minutes in. I don't know if you've ever experienced a film like that. But why do the titles come 42 minutes in? Well, who wants to summarize what happens in the first 42 minutes? It's simple. He observes his wife being unfaithful. With the young actor, he's going to cast as Uncle Vanya. And this is the wound that inflicts him that he is obsessed with. 2 years later, when he goes to Hiroshima to do this theater festival, he still carries it with him, and he's harbored it inside without sharing it. He's very into it.
Jim,
Yeah.
Ricky would like to say something.
Yeah, I don't know how this goes. I raised my hand, so I don't know how. Okay.
That's fine.
It is not clear to me that it was the actor, because you only see his wife's face in the mirror. You do not see, he assumes, according to what I saw, that it's the young actor. I don't think we really know.
Well, I think we do. I hate to ruin people. If people have noticed this, there's a conversation in the car with the young actor.
Yes.
Where he completes the dream of the girl who goes into the young man's home. And the wife only spouts this after she's had sex with somebody. You see, she revealed that dream to him, and together they worked the story up to a point, and she continued it with her young lover. And that's the actor's way of confessing, I loved her too. He does say I love her too, but you're right, it's unspoken. But
he may have admired her. She brought him to the play. He came into the dressing room. I'm just, I like to just think maybe not.
We try, it's fine to write your own script when there aren't answers in it. But I think, why do you think, here's a central question. So why did he cast the young actor in the role of Uncle Vanya, which he was not suited to?
Well, he wanted to get back at him. He wanted to make it difficult for him, obviously.
Well, but that's because you assume that he had an affair with his wife. You see, it's revenge.
Or
can't have it both ways.
or maybe he didn't. I don't know. I'm throwing in just a little.
Unless you passionately hold those beliefs. I'm all for seeing things different ways, but I think there's ample evidence in the film that he did it. He did it. And he seemed to know her far better than most other actors in her teleplays. So,
you remember that Kovu said that she had sex with many men.
Mm-hmm.
So I can understand Ricky's point.
It could have been some other man.
Yeah, it could have been anybody. I had the same reaction, Ricky, that you did. That he wasn't identified particularly, but he assumed eventually that he was the one.
Okay. So does this really affect how the?
It's a moot point.
It is. So let me just, Jim. Yeah. Let me just ask, so we don't talk over each other. If you would either raise your hand with the little button or raise your hand, I'll call on people so we don't talk over each other. Okay.
Yeah. The little button is under reactions. You'll see there's a raise hand tab under reactions. Lower part of the screen, you'll find a happy face with reactions and a plus sign. Now, here's the point. There's no point in conjecturing if it doesn't really contribute to the flow of the story. Marvin and Miriam, we have a saying in this group, and Ricky, for you too, don't let the facts get in the way of a good film, right? Whatever you perceive the facts to be. But you are calling it out on its own terms. And if the film didn't work that way for you, that's okay. Then it's problem with you, not your problem with it. But I think in a way, the casting of the guy is a revenge thing, because remember, Kafuku knows that performing Vanya tears you up. He says that deep into the film, in the conversations. And the words are so terrible if you let them take over you, that they do their work on you and they force a reaction that you may not like. And that's when the young man in the car says, well, you can't know anybody else, so you have to look into your own heart. I think it's a veiled conversation. They're both talking around the issue of the affair. And I want to save the ending at the site of the driver's destroyed home. I think there's a key to answering this question there as well. Because in a way, the uncertainty that Marvin and Ricky pointed out still has a life at the end of the movie. You know, it's about uncertainty. And in a way, I think that's why this film and Chekhov's work reaches out across the centuries and to us today, is that a lot of it's about uncertainty, emotional uncertainty, and the uncertainty of knowing someone else. And not knowing someone else or anyone else sort of is, can lead to despair and aloneness and purposelessness. And part of the theme of this film, I think we see in the solutions that Vanya brings to us at the end and that the driver brings to us at the end, are about working through it. So let's go back. So apart from, you know, we established the characters. Do we think Otto is a terribly creative person before she dies on us? Anybody want to comment on that? She seems to be a great marina.
If I talk too much, you'll stop me. All right.
Okay. I'll ring the gong.
Yeah. So she derives her plots after having an orgasm, and to me, after watching the film a second time, it seemed that her plots depend on the partner. Because when she was telling her story to her husband, that was a nuanced story about a young girl and her flirtations and her imagination. Mm-hmm. And when she was telling a story to the young lover, it was a story of blood, murder, and surveillance. So it was a more violent story.
Yes.
I think the partner collaborates with Otto in creating the plot, because they need to remember what she is talking about to write it all down in the morning. So she's not alone in developing the story.
No, Kafuku admits later on, we were a creative team like we were a sexual team. They were very much a part of her creative life. And he remembered the dreams and she didn't the next day. And that's, you see them after the first dream, that happens in a car. And she says she doesn't remember, and they work on it. It's like a story conference or a writer's room on a television show where they're working on plot ideas together and they bounce off each other. So this kind of intellectual foreplay is connected with what bonded them, you know, not just the sex. The sex was part of it because it was the ultimate goal. Because without the sex, they wouldn't have had the story engagement with each other. It was one and the same. Could not be separated from it.
Carmen?
I have also, it was the only thing that bonded them after their daughter's death.
Right. It came alive. That didn't happen before.
Yeah, that's very important because they didn't. Yeah.
Now, I want to point out, just like we don't know that the actor was the lover in the living room, there's a conversation early in the car. Do you want to have another child? And we don't know that they had one before, or that she died, or what the circumstances were. It takes an hour or so later in the film to learn she died of pneumonia when she was 4. And we weren't the same until we started doing this. So the sense of loss in his life is profound. He lost twice. He lost his daughter and then he loses his wife. We'll get to the driver's scene because she lost her mother, who had 2 identities as well.
Gail,
so you see the harmonies in this film. Yeah.
Gail, unmute yourself. Thank you.
Okay, I didn't, or maybe I missed it, but I am curious as why the credits were after about an hour. And I don't think we answered that question. And I'm curious about that because
Well,
I wanted to know if there was another film that has ever used this kind of a vehicle.
no. I think this is basically the line the filmmaker draws between before and after. She dies before, and she only comes back in a few flashed images after the credits. So it takes a good 40 minutes to get us into that story of what happened, seeing her with the lover, and then he goes back after, you see him, the eel story. She continues about the girl, dreams of becoming an eel or returning to be an eel. And so then we see him briefly watching eel videos on his computer. He blames himself for her death. Did anybody pick up on that earlier or later?
Steve Zimmerman.
Okay. Two things. One, yes, the credits coming along much later. I think the beginning of the movie is meant as a prologue to set up the rest of the movie, which was, pulling apart the pain in their lives and the losses and their sense of failure and wasted time. I'm sorry. What did you just say, Jim?
When did you feel he felt guilty about his wife's death?
Oh, yeah, I didn't get that sense until much later in the movie.
Yeah, I didn't either.
When he sort of said it. It doesn't make any logical sense to me anyways, but yeah.
Well, no, he explains it, Steve.
Later, I know I know he agonized about coming back, and if he had gotten back to the apartment earlier,
it's
maybe
irrational.
This would happen.
It's irrational, just like the driver's.
Right. I mean, that's what I meant by illogical.
But you see, for him, let's make it clear. For him, it may have been irrational, but he was so hurt by realizing her betrayal, and the betrayal we saw, that he couldn't, because she had said earlier in the day, let's talk tonight. There's something serious to talk about. And he couldn't face going back to her because he thought, oh, she's leaving me for one of these guys.
Yeah, though of course we don't know what she was going to say, right?
No, we don't know. And then she dies before he gets there. So of course, it's like, I should have done more. I shouldn't have been so afraid. Maybe if I'd gotten there earlier, I could have saved her, or she wouldn't have had the cerebral hemorrhage, which is, it's not relevant because, believe me, all of us have memories of, gee, if I'd done this, only that would not have happened. And it's,
but of course she engendered his conflict to begin with. Right?
Oh yeah, no, well, this is the point.
She was sort of the cause of him not going back.
Right. Well, but he doesn't see it that way.
Right.
He says, if only I could have loved her more and overlooked her flaws, her dalliances, her betrayal. And the driver comes back in later about, don't see it as betrayal, just see it as all of her. So let's leave that idea aside until we get to that scene in the snow.
Frank?
But obviously, he did forgive her because he was aware of her affairs with other men, and she always came back to him. And so she probably did love him. Perhaps she had a sickness, but she was consistent in her love for him all the time.
She was, and he was right to see it that way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that he forgives her entirely. He's still hurt by it. There's a difference between accepting a fact and letting it seep deeper and making you angry. I think the message at the end of the film is accept it and embrace it, because that was the whole person. So I don't think you're wrong. I just think that there are other ways to be stuck, and he was still stuck on it with his knowledge.
I have a question.
Frank, hold on. I'm going to call on people.
I'm sorry.
Frank, and then
Did you call me? I heard you say Miriam.
No, I
Frank
said
first, and then
Frank. No, Frank, then Marina, then
Miriam.
no.
What
I'm sorry.
I was going to discuss is an irrelevant point now, so I'll skip at this point.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Marina, then Carmen, then Brad, and then
Excuse me. I had my hand up way before.
I know. I see it. I'll get to you.
Others have their hands up too in the chat.
So Marina,
my question is, so the couple Kafuku and Otto discuss whether they should have, and Kafuku says, it's up to you. Kafuku knows that Otto has lovers, and he leaves it up to her. He does not insist on having a child, even though we think he wants one. And he does not confront his wife about the problems in their marriage. And I think these two aspects are related. I think maybe if he discussed having a child with her, didn't let her lead, maybe she would have been happy or didn't have as much time on her hand and would have been a different wife in their relationship. I'm just asking whether his avoidance of confrontation didn't contribute to the problems that existed in the marriage.
No, the problems existed before because he knew she had previous lovers. But the fact that she said there's something serious I want to talk to you about tonight, not now, set him on edge. And especially because he had recently seen her with her most recent lover. So the mind works in pretty predictable ways. And he was, oh my God, she's going to leave me for him, or she's going to tell me for sure I don't want a child, or it's going to be bad news for me. I want to avoid it. And that's the source of the guilt, because he wasn't courageous enough to go home early enough to deal with her directly that she died. And it's not entirely logical, but that's how we are.
Right. We'll have Brad, then Carmen, then Miriam, then Ricky. Brad.
Well, Jim, I don't think his concern was that she was going to leave him. I think his concern was that this would now have to be, that this was going to be verbalized between them. It would be out there.
Out there, yes.
It would be out there. And what this movie seemed to me to be about was language, whether it's storytelling, whether it's the subtitles that we see as the play is being enacted. It was even confusing to me, not knowing any of these languages, if these actors were speaking the same language.
Well, they weren't.
Because there were the parentheses around some of the speakers. So it seemed to be largely a play somehow about communication.
It absolutely was. And let's deal with that point right now. He is known, this theater director, for his multilingual productions. He will mix languages. And there's a vivid example of it when somebody's speaking Japanese and the answer comes in German. Maybe you pick that up with your ear. And there's another language that's being spoken in the play that we'll talk to later. It's sign language. So all this, you're so right, Brad, that it's all about the different ways we speak, yet we understand. And how is that possible? What is there in us that makes us see deeper into somebody than just their language? But he's not, he's neither a doctor of language or a philosopher. He's just worried about his wife. He's just being a mortal human being there, as brilliant as he is. And you're right. He's afraid they're going to have to talk about her affairs, which they haven't done to date. That's the major point. You're right. So thank you for that.
Carmen.
I don't know if it's still relevant, but I didn't get the idea that other than him saying that she had other lovers, other than him saying that in the car. And I thought he said it in the car, just revenge against him again. Where do we know in the movie that she has other lovers other than when he's smoking?
It's his firsthand opinion, his eyewitness. And we saw one of the eyewitness events, she said.
But does he ever refer to it? He doesn't refer ever, except that time.
Well, it doesn't come early in the film, but he doesn't have to. Just seeing the one incidence of unfaithfulness is a betrayal enough to set him on, and it's just.
Oh yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, and it's just before she dies. So of course that becomes the biggest incident and then it comes later on with the young actor that she's had other lovers. And in a way, you can see how he's like all these silent digs at the young guy.
Jim, it's Frank. I have to butt in here. I'm sorry. But in a scene where the director has his talk with the young lover, he says, he almost tells him, you weren't the only one. In that conversation, he mentions that she's had a series always, and they always last for as long as the story lasts, or the script she's writing, or the script that the actor is playing in. He says that sets it.
He doesn't say you, though. It's if you study the words in the subtitles, it's very indirect. It's all an insinuation without coming out and saying you are one of them.
Yeah.
You see, so that's what through people, that it's not as explicit. But again, my point is that he, in a way, his revenge and his defense is to hide behind words. He knows how to speak indirectly to people, just like he knows how to direct his actors indirectly. They say, tell us what you want. And he says, no, just read the text. And those of us who have some familiarity with theater, it is always like the Torah is that's the foundation. But the text always needs to be construed. He's saying, don't construe it, don't interpret it. Just read the words and let them take you over. Let them take over your mind, and you will involuntarily react to them because the words are so fine, as Marina pointed out.
So Miriam, then Ricky, LaDonna, Risa.
This was a surprising movie to me, mostly after it ended. While it was playing, I was going along with it. Then I realized how much there is to discuss. We can just discuss alone his directorship and the way he handled people. That's one phase. 2, we didn't even touch on his relationship with the driver, who was the same age as his daughter, had his daughter lived. Had she lived, she would have been the same age as the driver. We did not discuss the packages of groceries she was carrying. Was he living in that home that she was going to now open the door to? Was he in there? And all that. So let me come to this point. I want to discuss just this one point. This was, to me, a hugely evolved man. Absolutely. He made a decision before anybody even had a chance to even inform him if they would so do it, if they were a so-called friend, or whoever would take that role upon themselves. He knew of his wife's infidelity. He didn't even need them making love right in front of his face when he walked in the door. He seemed to be aware that his wife was built like this, who needed perhaps overactive libido. We're not even going to look into the reasons. Who needed lovers in spite of making her own husband a satisfied human being in the evenings. He immediately presented himself with this moral dilemma. Do I want to bring this to her? Do I want to have a confrontation? What do I want? Do I want her to plead to please forgive her? Do I want her to say, I'm sorry, this is our marriage and it will continue like this? Or do I want to stay married to her? Why? Because I love this woman and I don't care, and I will not let myself care what she does when she is not with me. I want to continue to be married.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And I think your interpretation is correct. I think, though, what we're looking at is the very human quality that even though he is terribly evolved and permissive, it doesn't mean he's not hurt by this. It's still a betrayal, even though he can accept it. And he hasn't made peace with this until he meets the driver and they share stories. So it's only 30 minutes into our conversation. So please forgive us for not having addressed the end at this point, but we'll get there.
Okay.
But good point.
Ricky,
Hi. I wanted to go back just for a tad. I happen to be in the arts, and I know that any production, any story, any writing is that person's baby. And it's interesting that she didn't want a child, but you have sex to have a baby. She had sex to write stories.
Yeah.
Whether it was with her lovers or whether it was with her husband. The other part I wanted to talk about, because you're talking about communication, it's interesting that he cast the Sonia character, and Marina, correct me if I'm wrong, Uncle Vanya was madly in love with Sonia, correct?
Yes.
Right.
No. Marina, fill us in.
No, I thought he was.
Somebody else was in love with her.
No.
Wasn't Uncle Vanya?
Uncle Vanya was in love with Elena.
Okay.
Sonia is his niece, his sister's daughter. Uncle Vanya and Sonia lived together working the land to sustain the professor.
And maybe her truth was something he didn't want to hear, right? So he cast that character mute and sign language. I'm just conjecture.
Well, it's a good idea.
Yes, Sonia was the kindest, the most hardworking character in the play. She was also, plain. The man she loved was not interested in her, but everybody was interested in Elena. And Uncle Vanya was in love with Elena as well.
Yeah.
And Elena was the one that spoke Mandarin, correct? And English.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ricky, you just brought up something very important. The end of the movie, almost the end, which is the end of the play, where it's Sonia who puts her arms around Vanya and convinces him to live again. And this is how you do it. No one's denying your grief, your frustration, your disappointment, your loneliness, but you have to move on. You have to live with this. And that is an amazing statement coming from a deaf person. But the actress herself at that wonderful dinner scene says, why treat me differently? I'm used to people not, communicating with me all the time. This is my norm. So you don't have to do anything special for me. It's kind of funny in a way. It's like a mute person's perspective from the inside, just like when we saw Coda or Sound of Metal. Those were deaf people's perspectives from the inside. We got to live very close to them. And so I think it's just more of the filmmaker's sensibility and his thorough devotion to be consistent, to say communication happens whether we like it or not. We understand the signing because it's in super titles in the actual auditorium. But I want to bring in the driver again, because in a way, she's a great driver. Why? Her mother, she learned to drive when she was in junior high. And her mother needed to sleep in the car while she went to work at a hostess club during the evenings. So she had to drive so carefully, the mother wouldn't be awakened by the bumps in the road. So what is the driver doing? There's a parallel there. Does anybody get it?
hold on. I think Risa wanted to say something. I don't know if she wants to address this or something else. Risa?
No, it's something else that's been bothering me.
Okay, well, this isn't. Yeah,
do you think that the wife Otto
yeah,
was bipolar, because the character who was telling the stories doesn't remember them in the morning, but she does in the evening pick up right where she was with the story?
Well, I don't know. She remembers, in the morning. The movie opens with her retelling a dream to him, right? But then they take the story further. In the
they
car.
take it further. But,
go
ahead.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. Yes, she's a strange person, but worthy of his love, and she loves him back.
Well, I think he knew.
He did know about her affairs.
No, I know about the affairs. He knew about the affairs, but I think he knew that she was ill, and that is why he was able to continue with this.
I don't.
Which gives him.
He says, I can't imagine living without her.
Correct, but I think that's what he's dealing with.
That's grounds for a lot of denial. But I personally, I don't go that far with interpreting his motivation for taking that position.
Okay.
I don't see it there in the movie, but if it made you think that,
I think that.
okay,
That's okay.
totally fine.
So, Jim,
Okay,
you
so-
had a question that was pending. You want to repeat it?
What was that, Fern?
You think I know, huh?
Ah,
You asked
The
what her
bump in the
purpose,
road.
yeah, why the purpose of her
the
as
definite.
the driver, and she
the
was a good
driver, okay.
driver. Yeah.
So I was comparing the driver to the deaf actor.
right.
And this goes to performance a lot, and it goes to the reference to Chekhov's writing and the text. The driver was so careful in the details of her driving. It's like she didn't seem to be speaking at all, because the perception of the director was, I never felt a bump in the road at all. But she wasn't doing nothing. She was very actively engaged in reading the road, like reading the text for an actor. And she was so faithful to responding to the road only that she smoothed out all the bumps, and he never perceived them. But that was the desired effect. So in a way, this is like any media or film studies, Steve, maybe you want to chime in, where you're trying to manipulate the audience without their knowledge. And it takes a lot of work to be so aware of somebody else's perceptions that you can manipulate them. Now, his direction to the actors was, don't think about the audience. Don't think about me as a director or pleasing me. Just read the text and let it work on you, and it will take over your soul. And it will bring out surprising reactions in you that you won't be able to control. This is, maybe some of you have heard about the Stanislavski method of acting, where an actor prepares himself or herself by so immersing themselves in the details of the character's life and their concerns, they lose their own persona. They become that person, and they start behaving as though they think that person would. So there's a couple layers of reality there. It's like making yourself, losing your ego while very consciously trying to react to somebody else. But it works for some people, and some forms of theater and some kinds of films very much employ that kind of, it's called method acting, which was popularized here by, what's his name, Steve, with an S? The Jewish guys in the New York theater? Strasberg, LA Theater.
Lee Strasberg.
Strasberg. So Lee Strasberg and Brando and Paul Newman and Joan Woodward.
Stella Adler,
right. They all were of that method acting school. And it's a strange thing. We're really talking about how our individual minds and emotions work. They don't always work together, but it's a discipline that actors achieve and directors achieve. And it's like how you think of an effect along with the cause that you're about to create. You don't create something unless you're sure of the effect it's going to have. And so he's trying to control his actors by saying, don't think too much about it. And he's not saying do a Zen thing with them, although it sounds like that. What he's saying is, don't think about me or the audience. This isn't about anything but the text. Lose yourself in the text, and it will tear you apart, and you'll do great. Just read the text. Barbara Balaban had something, I believe. Barbara,
then Steve Greenberg.
I was just thinking about his reluctance to play the part, which was his reluctance to come to terms with his own feelings, because he knew that the minute he involved himself in this experience, he was going to be cracked open. And he knew that there was a lot under the surface, and he was uncomfortable. He wanted to face it on some level, he thought he had, but he really was terrified of it. And I think that was why he didn't want to play the part.
Absolutely.
Really complicated relationship. And I think he wanted the young guy to play the part because he wanted him to get cracked open.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's what I meant by there's a slight element of malice or revenge to that.
Yeah.
But, which is okay. But it shows you how directors control their actors. The kid didn't even realize what was being done to him. And
I have a question, and
yeah.
maybe we're not there yet, but the whole idea of him murdering somebody, I mean, should we wait and not jump ahead?
Yeah, let's not jump ahead.
Okay.
Who's next?
Next is Steve and Jeff, but I left somebody out who was gonna Steve,
All right, well, let's
Ricky, I'm sorry, Steve, Ricky, Roz, and Jeff.
wow, very good, Fern.
I
Steve.
lowered my hand.
Okay. Steve.
I was just going to say that years ago, Laurence Olivier made a film with Dustin Hoffman called Marathon Man, about a former Nazi living in the Diamond District in New York. And Hoffman did exactly what you were talking about with the method. He didn't shave, and he lived in an apartment like the character would have lived in, and didn't change his clothes or wash them or launder them. And Olivier said to him, "Why don't you just try acting, dear boy?" So the point is, different actors and directors have different methods, and whatever gets you there works. There isn't one way that works for everyone. But I wanted to touch on two other minor points that have come up before, and I don't think anyone's mentioned. One was about the husband's awareness of the affairs and how he felt about it. There's a moment where he's having sex with his wife after witnessing her with the other guy.
Yes.
And he shifts her around into the same position she was in, where she was the more active participant, not being too graphic about it. And it's a dud. I mean, she doesn't respond at all to him.
She zones out.
And he's not happy about it. As he shouldn't be, I guess. So I don't know how evolved you have to be to not care in that circumstance. The other thing was when he's talking with the younger actor playing Vanya, and the young actor's talking about his relationship with Otto. He says it was unrequited. Now, unless he's out and out lying, I went back and I looked at the scene again where the wife was making love with the lover when the husband comes home. All you can see is the back of his head. And I was really trying to play detective and figure out whether it was him or not, because when I saw him at Otto's funeral, I was sure it had to be him.
Yeah,
but
I was too.
We don't have evidence. There's no smoking gun, so to speak.
Okay, but the point is the filmmakers led us. There's more evidence leading us to conclude that Tatsuku, or whatever his name is, it was the lover, because it all points to him.
Similarity. It's like when Alfred Hitchcock had a murderer strangle someone with a tie, and then another character is wearing a very similar striped tie. And Hitchcock said, "I didn't say he was the murderer," but it makes you jump to the conclusion because of the similarity.
I want to also point out then, when the director sees the two of them, he sees it in a mirror. And that's why he gets to watch for so long.
Yeah.
And the mirror was not as easily accessible to them as it was to him. He was watching around a corner.
Roz, Raybo, then Jeff, then LaDonna.
There's something
and Arlene
we didn't discuss. When he went to the doctor to have his eyes examined, he hit the car and found out he had glaucoma. That was another loss, a big loss, because he realized that he really probably shouldn't be driving. So the idea that he had a driver, for me, meant that he could accept it because he couldn't see.
Yeah, it's certainly there. But I think that's more a reminder of mortality and the change of life for him. And again, he is willfully blind to her affairs, right? He has great powers of denial or acceptance up to a certain point. And this is a finer point with him, that he can accept her infidelity because he said, "I can't imagine losing her. That was my greatest fear. So I tolerate all this stuff, these betrayals." But it's one thing, it didn't mean it didn't hurt. So can he endure the constant hurt that she inflicted on him because he got so much out of being with her, both story-wise and sex-wise? And he wasn't attracted to other women. Remember, there's a scene where the young actor says, "Oh, women come on to me all the time." And the director says, "Well, you can resist that." And he said, "Are you kidding? How do you do it?" He said, "I don't do it. It's different. It's apples and oranges for me." And to the young actor, it wasn't. It's something he actively pursued. He picks up one of the women in the cast. We see them driving back when they're late to the rehearsal. Where do you think they were coming from? And then there's a scene at the exit to the rehearsal hall or room where he says, "Just use good judgment," which is a warning. You're going to mix with a cast like that, just be careful, because you can screw up the production.
So now we have a huge list of people who I'll read it off so you know I've seen you. Jeff, LaDonna, Art, Natalie, Frank, Marina, Brad. in that order. Let's start with Jeff.
Wow.
Jeff.
So I have more of a question than a response. I agree with Brad that one of the major themes is about communication, or the lack of communication and the difficulty of communication. But I also wonder about the idea of suffering in this film as a major theme, that everybody in the film seems to be suffering in one way or another, whether it's Otto or her husband or the lover that she had, which and that's a question that I had, is that he ultimately kills somebody in a bar, right? He doesn't want to be photographed, and he kills the individual. Did playing the part of Uncle Vanya crack him? Is that part of what cracked him? And I want to return to the idea of the glaucoma, because in the story, as it finishes, doesn't she shoot somebody in the eye?
She stabs the
person in the eye. So clearly the eye thing is, I think, is important.
Yeah, it resonates.
But getting to the universality issue, I think the suffering part is part of the attraction of the Uncle Vanya story, as well as the film itself.
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that Uncle Vanya suffers largely. It's under his own delusion that the estate should return to him, and it doesn't, and it won't. And basically Sonia says to him, get over it. It's not going to happen. So you got to live on. And so there's a certain amount of acceptance there. And that's the appeal. He knows that playing Vanya will return him to the intense pain of the betrayal, that he had to live with every day with his life. He couldn't leave her. He had to be with her, and it hurt.
LaDonna?
I just wanted to say that I did not see the film, but wow, you people are intelligent.
Well, thank you very much.
I listened to the story, but I'm glad. As part of me is glad I didn't see it, because I don't want to see someone killing somebody. But at the same time, or someone sleeping with someone else when they're married to somebody. Anyway, but it sounds like a very a relatable film with people suffering and human.
Well,
human.
right.
And
that's Chekhov, and that's this director.
I have a question about theater. They have method acting, they have improvisational acting, and then they have, like the director could say, just go with what you feel, improvisate, I'm learning. But you all are so intelligent. Thank you for your input.
Okay.
I will get the film. I didn't have the money.
Well, thank you. I hope you can see it, Donna. But I want to tell you this. Once you see it, you may think we're less intelligent.
I don't know about that.
All right. Art, unmute yourself.
Vern, I had raised my hand at an earlier point. The things I have to say now may be unrelated, but I'll give you my thoughts. One, I thought that scene of the young actor, he had a long monologue in the car with the director. I thought that was one of the best scenes in the movie.
Why?
In part because you saw here was this seemingly callow youth who really had some depth and feeling to him that came across in that conversation. And you saw that he was grieving along with the husband for the death of Otto.
Yeah.
Also, one of the things that I didn't catch in the movie, but that a review I read of the movie mentioned, was that one of the lines that this young actor had to speak from Chekhov, and that others may have heard, or maybe it was in the subtitles, I missed it, was a line that said that men's relationship with women often is first as an acquaintance, then as a lover, and then as a friend.
Right.
So in a way, he was kind of forced to confess his own relationship with Otto. Through that line, he wound up quite taken with her and was grieving her death. Along with her husband.
Yeah, she could never become a friend to him, which he wanted, which he needed very much. Remember, he was a boy star. He had fans who loved him and knew nothing about him. But here, he thought her personality, her being, was promising a real relationship to him. But he's never to have that. You're right. That's a pivotal conversation. And do you remember what the conclusion was?
Accept her as she is.
Right. He also said, you can never really know anybody else when you try and look into their heart. But what you can do is look into your own. And I love that the first time I saw it, but this time I felt more depth with it. And what he's saying, without knowing it, is that you were looking into your own because you loved her so much, you could tolerate her. You needed her. And that you had to acknowledge as a more important truth than your jealousy or your hurt. So the truth of it was, you can't do anything about her, take her or leave her. If you can't leave her, then embrace it. A lot of wisdom coming from this punk, who turns out to be a violent character. Remember, there was a previous scene in the first bar scene when he tells some guy to delete the photo he took on his phone.
Right.
Usually
he's a volatile character.
Yeah,
he didn't
right.
realize he had any depth to him.
Right.
Until that scene in the car.
Right. And perhaps the role of Uncle Vanya unleashed that violence.
Right.
Without his knowing it. I mean, he's aware only up to a certain point. But this is what Kafuku is afraid of finding or experiencing when he plays the role himself. It brings out really strange things in people because Chekhov was so profound.
That's right.
One of the other things that struck me was, despite the director's insistence on adherence to the text and just concentrate on the words, one of the most moving scenes was the scene between the sign languaging actor and playing Sonia and Yelena.
That was beautiful.
In the park.
Which everything was expressed
right
so beautifully, despite one of them not speaking at all.
But you see,
it really showed the contrast between simply looking at the words and actually feeling and expressing.
So you're so right.
And the director at the end of that scene said, something remarkable just happened between the two of you. Convey that to the audience.
Yeah, let it include them. That's the next step forward. That's so true. And that's like the driver driving the car so carefully. It does something to the recipient of the message. And that's what art is about.
All right, we still have a long list of people. Natalie, Yvette, Marina, Brad, Arlene.
Okay, first of all, I thought it was a wonderful, wonderful film. And as it moves along, you're introduced to all the different characters, and each one of them is suffering in one way or another with problems. Everyone has a problem in this film. And as the movie starts going to the last third of the film, we then get taken inside the theater and inside the play, which is so important that Chekhov was picked as the play that this man was producing, because what's in his play is exactly what is the point, I thought, of the whole film. And I wrote it down because Uncle Vanya, when he is actually talking in this film, these are his words. The soul is twisted by self-pity of disappointments in life. And How can someone rest totally with this? And that is what's happening throughout the entire movie, is that everybody is troubled by their own problems of not being able to communicate, of the actual terrible things, like the driver had been tortured by her mother. All of it in their different experience, but all lead to the same thing, that the soul is twisted. However, what Uncle Vanya says after saying all this is we must move on. We must move on, meaning we cannot give up. And we cannot give up until we naturally die, meaning you never do anything for yourself.
When you said Uncle Vanya, you meant the play says this to us, because
the
lines delivered by Sonia. Right.
Yeah.
So right. And that is the major theme of it. We're just mortals here. None of us are in control of our destinies or our fates. And we're going to have these feelings and accept it. This is life. This really is life. It's like, who said we were meant to be happy, right? So you have to find a way of coexisting. Listen, it's a great discussion. We're running out of time, so I want to talk about the driver next. So let's hear from the people who had things to say. But
we have 3 people, and then we'll move it on.
Okay.
4: Yvette, Marina, Brad, and Arlene.
Okay, I just wanted, there's so much sadness in this play and so much depth, but there's a breath of fresh air between when they went to the home of the woman who can't speak but can hear perfectly, and her husband. And that seemed to be sort of a breath of light and freshness and reality. And it took a different slant completely than the rest of the movie.
It's like life doesn't have to be all barren and despair. A certain amount of happiness and acceptance is possible. Remember, she says, I'm used to people not understanding me. You don't have to treat me differently. And he says, is there anything we're doing wrong in the rehearsals? Are we hurting you? And she says, don't ask. Of course not. That's how I always get treated.
Jim, I
can relate to that. I can relate with the disability about that. I can relate to this. And then what Rachel said, I didn't want to interrupt, but about the deaf actor, I can relate.
Good. Thank you. Frank,
what I wanted to say, and you may consider this trivial, but you said earlier, or it's been alluded, that they had a problem, the director and Odo had problems in their marriage. Okay, the obvious sexual aspect, but at the beginning,
the betrayal, Frank. It's not the sex, it's the betrayal. There's a difference.
Well, at the beginning, they're portrayed as this wonderful creative couple, and he drops her off, and we don't know, and she doesn't seem to be. Maybe that was what was going to come with when she was wanted to have the serious talk with him. But she seems to be, in her world, oblivious to that, yet she loves her husband. Mm-hmm. And he says, he's not going to be bothered by that, but he really is. But it's his. But the marriage itself and how they work as a team seem to be,
that's right. Right. He embraces it. It works for him.
Yeah. So it's not all bad, but of course, sex is a big thing. But when he remains silent and refuses to confront her on that, whatever, he wants to create it as a non-problem.
But he may have created his own problem, right? He's certainly blaming himself for that.
Okay.
Marina, Brad.
Thank you. I was pained to see the scene of betrayal, but I was very much encouraged when the couple was at the doctor's. I'm going back to a few conversations before. That's when I raised the hand, because it seemed to me that she really loved him. She really cared about him and worried about him. Mm-hmm. At the same time, when the young actor is telling his version of continued story, the girl pinches the assailant into the left eye with a pen. the same eye that director Kafuku's is affected. I also want your take on the women driving the car, because Mr. Kafuku definitely is very irritated when his wife is driving, but willingly or not willingly, he allows the driver to drive his car and kind of gives her the rein. And my question at the end is, what is her role in his new life? Will she be his daughter or his wife when the film ends?
We don't write the script after the end of the movie. But please, we don't write the film past the end of the movie. But you'll notice the last scene of the movie is she driving the car after buying groceries, and she has the dog. I can't explain it. I don't know what it means other than that, here, take the car. You've helped me through this the way nobody else has. So let's talk about the driver. Wait, there's somebody else, Brad?
We have two people who have been waiting, Brad and then Arlene, and then back to you, Jim.
Okay, well, quickly about the car, it also has a different license plate than it had earlier.
Oh, right, it was Korean license plate.
So what are we to make of that? But the point 2 points I wanted to make were, one, about the glaucoma as a metaphor. Glaucoma as a disease is where you have a loss, but you don't realize that you've had a loss. Mm-hmm. And I think that's exactly what's happened to him in terms of his denial. And the cathartic scene at the end of the movie, where he is finally able to express his anger at his wife, which he has suppressed and denied throughout their relationship. The other thing that interested me was the going back to Uncle Vanya. I don't remember the play that carefully, but I think the triggering event in the play is the potential loss of a home.
Yes,
that's right.
And here we're dealing with 3 different homes, at least 3. We've got the home of the betrayal. We have the home of communication with the deaf actress. And then we've got this home of destruction, where they, their pilgrimage takes them. So I was wondering about the role of home in this movie. And then the question I have for you, Jim, is you had said how important it was to watch this movie all in one breath. And I'm wondering why you made such a point of that.
Well, I think we have to judge a movie on its own terms. And if it says I'm 3 hours long, it has to prove its weight. It's meant to be a continuous experience. It's not meant to be watched intermittently. You lose the emotional momentum, the thread through every scene. And had I not watched it a second time, I wouldn't have realized that the tape recordings were a direct response to what had happened in the previous scene. That's one thing you'd miss if you started and stopped. That would diminish in importance for you. You might not have noticed it. The other thing is there's this emotional momentum really ratchets up when the driver finally starts to talk. And we learn she's been listening all the time. She heard that conversation with the young actor in the car. Mm-hmm. And she heard it all and she got it. And remember, she said, I grew up with liars. I survived because I could see the truth and tell when they were lying. So that's when she first opens up. And then they go on this road trip to her hometown. And that leads to this remarkable scene. They're going to the trash recycling facility in Hiroshima, where they burn trash to create energy. And it's this super sterile, except for the trash facility, very modern. And she says, the Peace Dome is just down the road on this axis here. The Peace Dome is the dome that survived, the skeleton of the dome that survived the blast in Hiroshima in 1945. So that is lurking over it all. This huge scar on humanity, this terrible pain where 140,000 people were killed instantly, for one thing. But then it brings us back to this the theme of death, which is he lost his daughter and can never have another one with his wife because he lost his wife. So he has two deaths on his hands. And he says, you know what? You're the most grounded thing I've experienced here. Take me somewhere. Take me to your village where you came from. First, take me somewhere leads to the trash burning plant. And that beautiful scene where on the steps at the waterfront. I don't want to take the time to look up what happened there, but apart from tossing each other a cigarette lighter, there's the Peace Dome, TV. She leads him to a lot of catharsis, and they go to her village, and she takes him to the homestead that was smothered in a landslide. And first she says, my mother was killed in the landslide. And then she says, I killed her because I didn't go back in and save her from the second landslide. Well, what does this sound like? It's Kafuku's problem. I killed her because I didn't get back soon enough. And then she has to ask herself, why? Why didn't I go back in? Well, let's talk about the mother's backstory. The mother beat her. The mother left her alone during the days when she slept and left her alone at night when she worked as a woman for hire at a bar. And all she knew from the mother's persona was abuse and manipulation. But the mother had a split personality called Sachi, another person that appeared. And the driver said, this is the only love I ever experienced because we played together. She was kind to me. And I needed that so much in my life. I had to embrace the whole woman because when I let her die, Sachi died with her. So you see, this is very much like Kafuku saying, I have to embrace my wife's promiscuity for whatever reason she needs it, because it's the whole person and I need the whole person. I can't live or love half a person because they won't be there for me. So there's this parallel between their two lives, and that's what brings him to the point of trust where he realizes, oh my God, I've shared so much with this young woman, who somebody pointed out would be the same age as his daughter had she lived, 23. That's a remarkable scene. That's a breakthrough scene for him morally, philosophically, and emotionally, psychologically. He finally can confront what he's been doing to himself for the years before his wife's death and the 2 years after. I found that just powerful, and just it keeps accruing and accruing. And the speech she gives while he's just listening, she cuts him to the core the way Chekhov cuts actors to the core. And I just want to look up some of the things she says.
Yeah, while you're looking it up, I want to give two people who've waited a long time a chance to.
Okay.
Arlene and then Bobby.
I unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, Jim, you were just kind of summing up what I was thinking about during the film and after. If you recall, at the beginning, he was resistant, very resistant about the driver driving his car.
Right.
And then there was a turning point, as far as I see, that he went from being a passenger in the back,
right,
very upright, very uptight, very not trusting. And then at one point, he took himself into the passenger seat.
Yes.
And it was like then the two of them were having a relationship of some kind that he could accept. And that led then to the next part, which was going back to her hometown.
Thank you for bringing up that scene. You can keep talking. I just want to interject one thing. That is the scene when he gets into the front seat, where they both light up cigarettes and they stick their cigarettes up through the sunroof so as not to pollute the cabin. And that shot of just two cigarettes together, burning, smoldering in the night, it says so, it's very poetical. And it's a great shot because the lights of the highway behind them are, blurred and out of focus and round, but it's like stars. you know, and it's mythical almost. It's really a beautiful moment.
Especially when they go through the tunnels all
in
of
the tunnels, right, right,
Yeah.
right. In the long drive. Anything else, Arlene?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that.
Bobby Goldman, you want to unmute?
So you just touched on it a little bit. Early on, when you were talking, Jim, you said that the movie it had the metaphor of the red car, but it didn't have, or that wasn't to say that there wasn't a lot of layers to it. I'm not implying that in any way, but a metaphor that really struck me all the time I was watching it is in the tunnels. We were in tunnels. We were tunneling down into the heart of them, into the insides of them. That was what was happening while they were going along. And it was so powerful to me because it felt, it had a dreamlike quality to it. If you have that kind of sensation when you're in a dream, you don't know where you're going. But if you remember afterwards that you had that, it can reveal so much.
Yeah.
So
and you remember what you were feeling in the dream, even if you didn't recognize it while you were having the dream.
You remember that you had a feeling.
Yeah, and then you can react to it as a fully conscious person. Yeah, it's one of those things. These images are things where filmmakers try to find a visual equivalent to what's going on in the story between the characters.
I think that also, when you talk about the visual, the photography of this movie was so exquisite. You take a city like Hiroshima that was destroyed, and we look at, and it was beautiful, and it was the photography was poetry.
Well, that's why I found the dome so revealing, because it looks like a modern city. It looks like LA. I saw, or New York parts of it. And it's a reminder of the deep scars of the past. They're always with us. And I'm so glad, because everybody asked, why Hiroshima? And I said, I can't exactly say why, but I know how that peace dome worked in the film. I mean, I felt it, you know. Anybody else?
Mr. Ruxin, may I say something?
Yeah.
Music does the same thing in theater with emotionally. That death actor talking about, yeah, I get that all the time. I get ignored. I get treated differently. But I get treated differently too because of my disability. When I start playing piano and singing, they forget that if they don't know I have a disability, they don't. It's like, wow. But those who know go, she can do that. But I put everybody in a mood. But it's a gift from God. Like, you're a gift to me. This whole group of people is a gift to me, to teach me about theater and all the things I need to learn. I have so much to learn. Thank you so very much for this.
Well, I'm glad you brought up music, Donna, because music is another one of those arts that speaks to us in different ways, that is its own form. And it's another language, like sign language, that's so expressive. I mean, when you think of Coda, how much emotion we got, not out of close-ups, but about shots of people that started at their navel and went up to the top of their head, because you could see the face and the gestures at the same time. The double whammy of emotion. You know, things are expressive not because they're in words only, but somehow the arts have a way of conveying to us, and that include music, something that's deep and profound that we sense, we identify in each other, and we can relate.
That being said, I would like you to pray for me, because one of our members of the temple, Rick Dragon, who writes for Days of Our Lives, it has a friend in New York whose name is Andrew Lloyd Webber, and he's telling him about my musical abilities, and I don't know what's going to happen, but oh my gosh, to be able to get an opportunity to sing for that man,
that would be wonderful.
It changed my life.
Who's next?
That's it. You're it.
Oh, okay. So I want to go back to that scene in the snow. Remember snow?
I'm sorry. Wait. Risa, sorry.
Risa, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about Hiroshima. When I hear the name Hiroshima, and then when you see this movie also, it was completely destroyed. people were killed, and now it's a thriving, beautiful city that a lot of people go to see.
Mm-hmm.
So the troubles and the problems in this movie do the same thing. When you come to the end of the movie, you see a future for all of the actors, let's say, except for the one who's in jail.
There's a way of carrying on that can be productive.
That's right.
Without forgetting the past.
Exactly.
You know, it's always, Faulkner said the past is always with us. In fact, it's never even past. But we don't seem to have learned very much from it because we're repeating our same historical mistakes.
Remember
in the Ukraine and elsewhere in our own society. But let's talk about that scene on the snowy hillside. You know, snow is a great symbol of purification, and it's really the snow we see, maybe for the second time, but it's all in snow there, where she's driving to the scene of the homestead that was destroyed. And so the purification is also a release. And how does she release him? Well, first she reveals the cruelty of her mother and the second personality of her mother. And of course, that relates to the loss of his wife and his child. And for the first time, he touches her physically. He extends his hand to her. She's trying to come up the slope. Huge move for him, you know, of acceptance. And then she goes into this speech, which doesn't feel like a speech because it's so heartfelt. And she talks about you have to accept your wife as a whole person. And then she repeats this thing about listen to yourself, just like the actor said in the car. You want to yell and apologize for not being strong enough to endure this. But that's kind of our life, isn't it? We yell, we apologize, and we love. And it's all part of living. And you have to accept this as the human experience, what makes us human, you know, above the animals. If this is, you know, I'm one of those cynics who says, well, if there's divinity in us, it's all of us. It's all parts of us. And our ability to do this, our ability to feel is probably the most beautiful thing we experience apart from the arts. And she's trying to drive him into that. Don't beat yourself up because you weren't strong enough to resist feeling bad. This is life itself. Survivors think about the dead, she says, and they keep living that way. And if you want to relate it to Judaism, it's yahrzeit and the constant connection with the past and those who had an impact on us. You can only live if you acknowledge death. Either Aristotle or Socrates who said, you have to practice dying every day. It is a real presence in our lives. And until you embrace it, you can't live it fully. And kind of that's, you know, that leads us to the final scene where he's actually performing and taking on the role. Remember, he first refuses to, and then you see him do it. That's a sign of acceptance too, that he's traveled somewhere, someplace he couldn't go before because he couldn't perform the role for years before this. And it's just this wonderful, you know, I can't define what this film is about in one sentence. I don't think any of us can. It's just about so much, but that's what makes it really beautiful, I think, and really compelling. I think more would come from seeing it a third time if I had a spare 3 hours without looking for other films for us to watch. But I thought this was wonderful, and I'm so glad that it won the Oscar because it deserved it. There are always wonderful films, and I encourage us to look at foreign films a lot. I'll try and bring more in, although we've been pretty good about that. And we're going to meet in 2 weeks. And what did I say the film would be?
You didn't?
What?
You didn't?
I guess I did in an email.
Yes, he said how they emailed about this. Let them all talk. I think.
Oh, Let Them All Talk. Yeah, really interesting film. I mean, you can watch it just for the cast. I mean, Meryl Streep and Candice Bergen. You know, it's like, it's a really well-told story. It's almost a mystery. It's a lot of fun. I don't know that it concludes that much, but it's really worth watching. And then there's another film I want us to watch when it's streaming. It's in the theaters now. I always recommend you see films in the theaters. It's called The Duke with a famous British actor, and Helen Mirren. And it's about a man who steals a painting from a Dutch museum, but he holds it hostage in order to raise ransom money for charity. And he goes to trial. Helen Mirren is just outstanding, as she usually is. And it's this great, it's not a court film. It's really about the heist and why he did it and will he get off or not.
Jim Broadbent plays the
Jim
other
Broadbent, right. It's so good. It's funny. It's meant to be a comedy, but it's profound. Now, this was directed by Roger Michell, who did Changing Lanes for us. We were also taken about the business thriller with Ben Affleck and Samuel L. Jackson. And this was his last film. He passed away shortly after it. He did another film just before it with Susan Sarandon about a woman who's terminally ill and her last weeks with her family before she takes the potion to kill herself. And it's kind of dark, and I don't think it's as well made as his other films, but I'd rather we see The Duke. But this is a really sensitive director who won't be working any longer, and it's too bad. This is a crowd pleaser, and so that'll be The Duke after Let Them All Talk.
Jim, before we have to get off, Brad has had his hand up and I want to let him get the last word.
Well, Jim, I just wanted your take on the very final scene of the movie where we see her in the car. Maybe it's my glaucoma, but it sure looked like that scar that was on her face isn't there anymore. The change in the license plate, what are we to make of the final scene?
I don't know. I didn't even recognize it as her because she changed her hairstyle. She's much more feminine, whatever that means. And the dog's with her. It wasn't her dog, but it's a Korean couple. The deaf woman and her husband are both Korean. The sign language was Korean. So there's all kinds of harmony in that, but I can't say, all I can say is he probably gave her the car. She didn't steal it, I don't know. And it's enigmatic. I would have loved to have gone out on the theater scene where Sonia, the deaf Sonia, is embracing Vanya, and we fade out and you hear the applause.
I mean,
but he told her life was going to get better. Remember in the stuff there, he said it's going to get better. So that's maybe what they showed us.
Well, it certainly got better for the driver. She's carried on.
For her, right.
Yeah. In the play, at the very end of Uncle Vanya, they end up keeping the estate. So is this car her new home, so to speak?
Yeah.
You're right. Homes are very much a part of it. But you think of this film about existential insecurity. Homes are the buffer against that. Homes are the one thing we can claim to be our own and unique. Until your wife has an affair, or you don't pull your mother out of the house before the second landslide. It's
God forbid.
Yeah. Well, this was a great.
Also, she did play with the dog when they were at dinner.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
Right. She did take a moment. Maybe that was the dog I didn't really watch, but if she indeed went with them to Korea, that could have been their dog.
Well, I'm not going to make a joke about that, but you're right. I mean, and who knows what the connection between.
We don't know, but she was bored at the dinner table and she got down on her knees to play with the dog.
Yeah, I mean, she reached out emotionally. I think she was very moved by what she observed, but wasn't included because it wasn't the place. Right. This was a great discussion. I'm so happy for all the points of view you brought and how much you all embraced the film and took it to heart. I mean, this is what good films do. They at some point they defy description and they just work on us. That's artful filmmaking. And this is what we hope to do going forward. So thank you all. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Fern.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Fern, for hurting all of us cats.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for making my weekend.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you so much.